have to deal with it, go home, and you will never be able to live normally again. And yet, lo and behold. So the reason I brought the books is so that if you want, at the end, just come up and take a photo of the 4 together, or 2 plus 2. If you're interested in even looking up the particular author in question on YouTube. You may not even want to buy their books, but you can look up their web pages, you can look up their talks on YouTube, on other arenas. Some talks are short, or TED Talks. Some are short, some are an hour and a half long. But you can inform yourself much more in depth about what I'm going to talk about today than just my particular bit of information that I'm going to be giving you. And one of the books is by the superstar of neuroscience. His name is Norman Doidge. He's a neurological psychiatrist who has written 2 books. I've only brought one of his, The Brain That Changes Itself, which is this one. The Brain That Changes Itself. And he speaks of brain transformation in so many different instances that I'm obviously not going to talk about, because for that you can just read his book. I do speak of an example that he has in the book, but he shows you in minute detail how this and that and the other thing can be fixed by neuroplasticity. And that is the most incredible thing that has happened in science in the last 50 years, or probably 500 years. Because as you will recall, most of you were born and started learning at school and got to a point in your learning where you were told the brain is hardwired. We cannot change our brains. You were also told if you lose your brain cells, for example, alcoholism has been related to loss of brain cells. Exuberant marijuana smoking has been related to loss of brain cells. Cocaine sniffing over longer periods of time has been related to the loss of brain cells. So I'm not saying that now, because of what we know, you can go ahead and do this, because we now know there is neurogenesis, which means you can grow new brain cells. But let me sort of backtrack a little. Oh, and the other housekeeping bit is, sorry, about the questions, taking the photo of the books of the different people that I've included in my talk. And then here are my books. If you're interested, at the end, have a look if you want any of them. Now, I've also got something in Spanish and something in German, in case you should prefer. But let's go back right to the very beginning. What exactly is neuroplasticity? You probably know, but just in case, it is the capacity of the brain to literally change itself. And that means that if I take a scan of your brain now, and then you go and do something along the lines of what we'll be discussing, and then we take another scan of your brain, we will see physical changes in the tissue. Physical changes. Now, these physical changes translate into something different on the outside, in the sense that you are now able to do this or that or the other that you couldn't do before, which is, to my mind, absolutely mind-boggling. And of course, the constant onslaught of new information that is coming out in the field of neuroscience is, from my point of view, so important and so fascinating that you don't have to be able to read, academic journals in order to inform yourself about how it could positively impact on your life. All you have to do is keep a little bit abreast. Google, for example, TED, if you like TED Talks, plus neuroplasticity, or TED plus brain. And before you know it, you have a bunch of videos that you can look at and have explained very intelligently, but in layman's language, what is going on, especially if you pick out the ones that are newer, right? If you go to TED and you see the ones from 2010, well, presumably those have older information, so look at the newer ones. Or simply go to YouTube itself and put in the same search terms. There are numerous organizations out there. Google Talks, which are generally an hour and a half long compared to TED, which are only 18 minutes or so. Google Talks, Microsoft Research Talks, and many others that put out freely information with specialists, with experts on these subjects that you can keep informing yourself about so that you know what could be. I need for you to understand, to this very day, here 2019, if you go to a typical doctor or neurologist about something that has happened to you, you will probably not get somebody who is actively using the knowledge of neuroplasticity. And if they aren't, they're not going to give you as good of a chance of recuperating from whatever it is you have as somebody who is well versed in the matter and somebody who is interested in the matter and who's reading up on what's happening. And of course, that's only your physical self. I say only because the part that I find truly fascinating is the way it can affect your psyche, your thoughts, your emotions, your default modes of behavior and action and thought. All those things can be changed thanks to neuroplasticity, as long as you know how to do it. And you'll see by the end of this that how to do it is quite simple. It is not, I'm not talking now about great physical difficulties. That you need your specialists for, and you need to go to them. But the part that has to do with your own manner of thinking and feeling and reacting and behaving, that's totally on you. And it is so simple to change as long as you stick to it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So changing your neural pathways, which is really what this is about, and remember, it changes not only on this psychological and emotional level, it literally changes the tissue in your brain. So there is not a question of it not being easy to prove. It is very easy to prove. There are evidence-based trials that have been going on now for quite a long time that refer to this, that show us what happens. Evidence-based trials, you have to remember, are that which science accepts. So while I apply this to clients who come to see me on a professional basis, I apply this in a way that is only visible once you change your way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. In other cases, it is visible because now you can walk in a straight line. Whereas before, because you had your accident, the only way you could walk was like this. You see, these evidence-based trials are fascinating things again to look at. Okay, so let's go back. Well, first I want to give you two wonderful quotes from way back, long before they were talking about this. Aristotle said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And the reason that is important and refers to our interest here in neuroplasticity today is because when you examine your life, you are actually being present and mindful, and you are using your neural pathways to look at what has happened to you in your life in such a way that you can observe it and that you can think about it perhaps slightly differently. Could you just open the door a little bit, please? It's getting a little close in here. And then, so your examined life is something that gives you the opportunity, as you examine it, as you observe it, as you discuss it with yourself, gives you the opportunity to potentially change something. And then there was a very famous Scottish philosopher called Thomas Carlyle who said, "The greatest of faults is to be conscious of none." And here again, the connection to neuroplasticity is the word conscious. If I want to change something in my way of behavior, thinking, feeling, or maybe I have a terrible physical something that I was born with or that happened to me due to an illness or an accident, but that is related to the neuroplastic factor of my brain, then of course I need to be conscious of it to change it. Otherwise, I can never change it. Let's say I play bridge and I never properly learn 2-3 of the rules. Well, my game will always be off. Why? Because I'm not conscious of the rules. I'm not paying attention. I'm not sticking it into my head, although it is a very elementary example. So let's go back a little bit into what happened in the entire history of neuroscience, and it has been around for quite some time. Up to the 1980s, nobody knew anything about this. Some wrote about it, some suspected it, some neuroscientists way back, but nobody was ever able to prove it. And then, guess what happened? Off in Switzerland, they're doing some geriatric studies, so they're looking at people probably in their late 80s and in their 90s who are living in elder facilities. Not necessarily because they have anything wrong with them, simply because they're elderly and they don't have perhaps a family member to take care of them. So they gave these people, for example, an instrument to learn how to play. Or they had them learn a new language if the person had an interest in learning a new language. And of course they had taken brain scans prior to this, and after the learning took place, they had their first breakthrough. They realized that the brain had changed. In the section, for example, if you're playing the guitar, obviously the two hands are involved, right? In the sector of the one hand where I'm, doing like this, on the other hand where I'm doing like this, or whatever it is I do if I'm playing the guitar. Those areas of the brain had changed in the following way. Where before there were, for the sake of argument, 8 different neural pathways that connected in 64 different ways, now there were perhaps 24 different neural pathways that connected in perhaps 395 ways. My example is not good, but this is what happened. And of course, scientists were astounded. This meant the brain changes according to what you do. And this is a very elderly population that they were doing this with. So of course, there was great joy upon discovering this. And bit by bit, it led to a number of other factors that are very related that have to do with the brain. So the next thing they discovered, although it took about 15 years, I think, between that and this other discovery, they realized that the brain can grow new cells. That is called neurogenesis. But they also realized that in order to grow new cells, you have to do certain things. You can't just sit in your room and watch TV and have pizza. Sorry, you're not an American audience, so whatever the English equivalent would be. But you see, the things you have to do are very easy, but you have to do them. For example, keep on learning new things. And keep on learning new things doesn't just mean doing crossword puzzles the way they were saying for a long time regarding Alzheimer's. It's not good enough. My beloved maternal grandmother did crossword puzzles like nobody's business about the hardest things in the world. I had no clue how she knew that until finally I realized, of course she knows it, because they kind of repeat. They may not repeat for an entire year, but the terminology repeats, so she knows that ancient Viking king that did something in 580 or whenever Viking kings were around, she knew his name. But not because she had learned all about it, but because by this time there was a memory of that name in her brain. So sure, her brain had changed a little bit at the beginning when she was learning all of that. But it had not changed after perhaps the initial learning of all the different terminology. So perhaps for 20 years, once she had all that terminology in her head and she was able to do crossword puzzles really, really quickly, very complicated crossword puzzles, there was no more learning taking place. So you see the difference. You have to keep being interested in new topics. For me, I notice when a topic that I am interested in comes around, or I can learn something new about a topic I'm interested in, my stomach has some